To this meeting, who wants to settle down? I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting on left-wing communism, which is part of the 80 years after Lenin's death course, How Relevant Are His Ideas? My name's Amy, I'm going to be chairing the meeting. Our speaker in this session is Dave Hayes. He's one of the industrial organisers for the Socialist Worker Party. He's going to speak for about just over 30 minutes, after which there will be time for people to ask questions and make contributions. I believe we're going to use a system of speakers' slips, which I hope people are familiar with, but if you want to make a point, you can just write down your name on the slips that the team are going around with and details of that point, and they will then hand them to me and I can call you out to speak. But if you do want to ask a question, feel free to do that as well, and then we're going around with the slips. Okay, so I'll pass over to Dave.
Right, I was a young worker when I first came across the pamphlet, and at the time I thought, Lenin's left-wing, I'm left-wing, so why does he think I'm infantile, and what sort of disorder do I have? And that really took me a little while to come to terms with, and really I want to try and explain what the pamphlet is really about. And I want to start with just a factual thing, that really this was Lenin's last serious pamphlet that he wrote. He wrote it in early 1920, and I really do believe it is as important as what the Communist Manifesto was, written by Karl Marx in 1847. And it was important for this reason. You had the Russian Revolution, the success of the revolution, which had an immense impact throughout the world. And really that pamphlet was written for the emerging new international movement that was beginning to come together. It was beginning to come together under the banner of the Communist International. And if you like, Lenin wrote it just before the second Congress of that International was going to take place. That is the coming together of international delegates from all of the new communist parties that had been set up in Europe especially, but around the world. And really, when you think about Europe at the time, the success of the Russian Revolution had really shaken the ruling class internationally, not just in Russia, but internationally, to its very foundations. The idea that ordinary workers could make a revolution and become a banner for every other worker was absolutely anathema to the international capitalist class, and it shook them and rattled them, because here was the example of workers being able to take power and so on. And of course, saying that, having once been shaken, after the Russian Revolution hadn't spread to other parts of Europe, that other revolutions had been brought to an impasse or had been set back or defeated, the capitalist class began to regroup. They started to get back their confidence because they withstood the revolutionary movement that had been set alight by Russia. And of course then, the ebb, if you like, of the revolutionary movement, it also had its impact inside of the working class movement as well around Europe. The feeling of hope, the feeling of possibility of revolutionary change inside large sections of the working class movement had now begun to turn by 1920. However, rather than the numbers of revolutionaries be numbered in their tens before 1917, we now had revolutionary organisations or parties in their tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in various European countries. And really, Lenin wrote the pamphlet in order to rearm and arm the new communist movement that was beginning to develop, and so on. Therefore, what is the pamphlet all about? Rather than being an infantile disorder, Lenin goes back to where Marx said about the emancipation of the working class being the act of the working class itself. That is, ordinary people the people that we work with, live with, go to college with, go to school with, live next door to, that by and large remain passive most of the time, somewhere along the line they will become the subjects of change inside of their history, and in the course of it begin to change themselves. And of course, to make a revolution, Lenin always started from the premise that you have to have the majority inside of the working class to do that. Now, if you start off with that premise of Marx about the emancipation of the working class, if it was straightforward as that, then of course we would be living in socialist paradise now, wouldn't we? I mean, I would be in a beach in Spain, really starting to enjoy the later part of my life and so on. However, Marx also painted the other side, which was the prevailing ideas in any society are those of the ruling class. That's a big contradiction. Therefore, most of the time, most workers accept the parameters of the system, the idea that we're not good enough, you've got to have people at the top, got to make profits, and so on. Of course, if that was true, then we would never have socialism. Therefore, I might as well go and sun myself on a Spanish beach anyway, because it'll be hopeless trying to change the world. The contradiction at the heart of those two statements from Karl Marx leads to uneven consciousness inside of the working class movement. On the one extreme, you have a small number that really never want to fight. Anything that the boss says to you, you accept. On the other extreme of the working class movement, you have another group that really, no matter what the boss has to say, you want to tear his or her head off. In the middle, there's the big bulk, the majority of workers that have contradictory, confused ideas and so on. And really, there's a battle of ideas that go on between the two extremes, the most backward and the most progressive, for influence over the majority inside of the middle. Not just inside of the working class movement, the ruling class intervene in that debate, other political organisations intervene in that debate in order to try and win their political views and so on. And if it's a battle for ideas, Marx then went to spell out, and Lenin followed him by saying there's two ways workers break from the prevailing ideology. In any society, a minority can always break. A lot of people in this room probably have come to the conclusion that we need a better world on the basis of ideas alone. That can only ever be a minority, a small minority or a big minority, but a minority nonetheless that just break ideologically from the system. For the majority, they'll have to engage in struggle, mass action, mass experience of that struggle in order to throw off the old baggage of the way of seeing things and so on. And therefore, the depth, the breadth and the intensity of the struggle that goes on can either help or hinder the development of the middle ground beginning to shake off the old ways, the old organisations, the old ways of doing things. And of course it's obvious, isn't it, in a revolution that is writ large when people really begin to get a sense of their own power inside of their society. Big questions like their fighting capacity, the feeling of confidence, the idea that everything is possible, what Lenin described, revolution being the festival of the oppressed and so on. The idea that workers feel that everything is possible now, that we can not just fight the daily fights against the boss, we can go on to transform the world and so on. At the same time, that can help workers break from the prevailing ideologies. A lack of struggle, of course, can reinforce the old ways of seeing things that really have workers really got the ability to change things. Aren't we too greedy? Aren't we too selfish? Don't we always need the people that go through universities and the top schools to run society for us and so on? Really, Lenin's book list is about teaching and developing a new generation of revolutionaries, even if it's a large minority, how when the struggle moves against you, how you begin to relate to workers that don't accept your way of seeing things, how you begin to influence them